Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un standing together at a military parade sounds like the opening scene of a Pentagon nightmare. But that's exactly what happened recently in Beijing, complete with nuclear missiles, hypersonic weapons, and a guest list that read like America's sanctions database. And while Washington looked on in horror, one of America's top allies was cozying up to Xi and cutting deals in the back of Putin's limo. So, what happened and where did it all go so wrong for US foreign policy? My name is Guy and you're watching The Coin Bureau. Last month, the United States felt it had to teach India a lesson about loyalty. Those rascals in New Delhi had been buying cheap oil from Russia to keep their energy prices manageable, knowing full well that this undermines the West's sanctions regime and America's appearance of being in charge. The sentence handed down from the White House was a 50% tariff on Indian exports, framed by the State Department as a defense of the rules-based order. India needs to stop funding Russia's war machine, they said, hoping that nobody would notice how American nuclear plants keep running on Russian uranium and European factories depend on Russian palladium. Now, India's Commerce Minister called it economic blackmail. The State Department called it principled diplomacy, and, well, you can make your own mind up about that. And that 50% tariff was actually two separate 25% tariffs, both meant to put India back in its place. The Russian oil tariff was overlaid on top of an existing 25% reciprocal tariff to punish India for its average effective tariff rate on American goods of 7.5%. Don't ask me, I'm not a maths guy. The 50% now applies to everything from Indian textiles to pharmaceuticals shipped to the US, affecting around $15 billion in annual trade, most of which is probably now priced out of the market. But while India was getting hammered, America was feeling more merciful towards China. On the 12th of August, Washington and Beijing agreed to another 90 days of relief from the pending 145% tariff rate. It's been a messy year of threats, rollbacks and postponements, so don't feel too bad if you haven't managed to keep up. After a bonkers tit-for-tat left each country on the sharp end of a triple-digit tariff threat in April, the US and China agreed in May to a temporary reduction. For 90 days, they enforced lower rates of 30% and 10% respectively, and resumed issuing statements about, quote, productive negotiations and, quote, mutual understanding. In August, this arrangement was extended for a second time and will now be in place until around the 10th of November. So, yes, India, which hosts American military exercises and spent $20 billion buying American weapons last year, was rewarded with a devastating punishment, while China, which does no such thing, got the carrot. Make of that what you will. Anyway, by late August, India's Economic Affairs Secretary was busy announcing support packages for affected exporters, while the government ramped up its trade negotiations with fellow BRICS nations, ASEAN countries, and the Gulf states. Having tasted the same stick that the US normally uses to discipline your Irans, Venezuelas, and North Koreas, India said, I deserve better, and began exploring rupee to ruble and rupee to yuan payment mechanisms to bypass the dollar entirely. And by the way, if you're enjoying the video so far and want to get more content like this, then smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ping that notification bell. So, on the 31st of August, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi went off to Tianjin for the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, the security club that includes China, Russia, Iran, and other non-Western aligned states. The timing was impeccable. While American diplomats were still explaining why punishing India was actually good for democracy, Modi was patching things up with Xi Jinping. Now, for context, India and China were at each other's throats over a messy border dispute for over a decade. If your algorithm ever fed you viral videos of skirmishes between Indian and Chinese forces armed with sticks and stones, yup, that's what they were beefing over. You have to hand it to them. It's much harder to accidentally start World War III with a bunch of sticks, right? Well, anyway, this military standoff was quietly resolved last year, conveniently clearing the path for exactly this moment. Xi pulled out all the stops. Quote, "The dragon and elephant have to unite," he told Modi, dropping the kind of line that makes State Department wonks reach for the antacids. Both leaders made sure everyone heard them declare they were, quote, development partners and not rivals. And if the subtext wasn't clear enough, Modi then broke the fourth wall, stared right at the camera lens, and declared that India-China relations, quote, should not be seen through a third country lens. Translation: stop trying to use us against each other, we'll figure this out for ourselves. And that one's got to sting. American strategists spent a decade positioning India as a free market counterweight to China, in a strategy that lasted about 72 hours after the tariffs hit. And the very next day, Modi met with Putin. Now, if the Xi meeting was awkward for Washington, this one was just painful. Quote, India and Russia have always stood shoulder to shoulder, even in the most difficult situations, Modi announced, while presumably still buying that verboten Russian oil. Putin beamed, the cameras rolled, and someone in Langley was probably throwing their slippers at the TV screen. Meanwhile, the SCO itself was having a moment. The organisation rolled out its vision of indivisible security, the idea that one nation's security can't come at the expense of another's. Sounds nice, but it's pure poison to the Atlantic alliance of NATO, whose existence is premised on the very divisible security of West versus the rest. The SCO wants no military blocs, no zero-sum games, just everyone getting along in a multipolar world. Now, whether you buy it or not, the message was clear. There's an alternative to the Western security architecture, and it's accepting applications. Now, by the 2nd of September, Modi was heading home, having essentially flipped Washington the bird, using only diplomatic language and photo ops. But little did they know that the real show was about to begin. On the 3rd of September, Xi Jinping stood at the centre of Tiananmen Square, with Vladimir Putin on his right and Kim Jong-un on his left. The three of them cackled like old friends while nuclear missiles, robot dogs, and a whole load of other scary-looking weapons rolled past. Now, if you'd pitched this hammy scene to a Hollywood studio 5 years ago, they'd have probably shown you the door. But in total, 25 heads of state showed up to China's V-Day military parade, including Iran's President Pezeshkian, Myanmar's military chief, and leaders from Pakistan, Vietnam, and most of Central Asia. Slovakia's Robert Fico and Serbia's Alexander Vučić carried the team for Europe. The contrast with China's military parade back in 2015, attended by South Korea's president and the US ambassador, was stark. But symbolism aside, the hardware China had on display is also worth your attention. For the first time in history, they showed off their complete nuclear triad, with land, sea, and air weapon systems all capable of launching nukes. And the parade announcers weren't subtle about it either, calling it, quote, China's strategic trump card for safeguarding national sovereignty and defending national dignity. I don't know how that sounded in Chinese, but the English translation is a bit on the nose, isn't it? Anyway, guests were treated to a look at new ICBMs with a 20,000-kilometre range capable of hitting Washington from anywhere in China, a massive black underwater drone that looked like something out of a Bond film, and hypersonic missiles specifically designed to sink aircraft carriers, which the Chinese media helpfully calls carrier killers, in case anyone missed the point. We imagine that somewhere deep in the Pentagon, a team of accountants is poring over zoomed-in parade footage, trying to calculate the new price of military intervention in Taiwan. Now, conspicuously absent from Beijing's parade was Narendra Modi. After spending 2 days cheesing with Xi and Putin in Tianjin, he skipped the main event entirely. Was he trying to avoid overdoing rage-baiting Washington? Well, maybe, but the US doesn't appear to be the main reason Modi skipped the parade. Apparently, the real reason was Japan. Anonymous Indian government sources told the Japan Times that India regards the parade as an event marking China's victory over Japan, which is perfectly accurate, and that, quote, India has no intention of hurting Tokyo. Now, that last part is a remarkable angle, given that the victory in question was China's liberation from colonial rule and plunder by the Nazi-allied Japanese Empire in World War II. But, well, you can't be too careful, I suppose. For reference, Japan had just pledged to invest 10 trillion yen, or about $67 billion, in India in late August. And this might have spoiled Modi's appetite for spectating at China's V-Day parade. He needs Japanese investment almost as much as he needs Russian oil. So, Modi attended the summit, cut his deals, then conveniently had urgent business back in New Delhi before the tanks started rolling. Now, this is multi-alignment done beautifully. Deepen ties with China and Russia while keeping Japan happy. Buy Russian oil while maintaining American military contracts. Join BRICS initiatives while staying in the Quad, India's security partnership with the US, Japan, and Australia. It's the geopolitical equivalent of dating multiple people who all hate each other and somehow making it work. By Wednesday morning, the pictures were all over the internet. Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy was in a shambles, and all it took was a bad tariff and a good parade. Now, while the West was doom-scrolling parade clips, Putin and Xi were busy cutting some rather important deals themselves. The Power of Siberia 2 pipeline deal, stuck in negotiations for years, suddenly got unstuck. Putin called it the culmination of patient work driven by China's growing economy and its need for reliable energy, which is a nice way of saying Russia desperately needs customers and China wants cheap pipeline gas priced in yuan. That pipeline will pump 50 billion cubic meters of Russian gas to China every year through Mongolia. For context, that's about what Germany used to buy from Russia before the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was blown up. This time, though, the gas piped to China will be priced in rubles and yuan only, not a dollar in sight. Meanwhile, in Mumbai, the Reserve Bank of India was doing its own dollar dodging. Within weeks of the tariff shock, they started setting up rupee-to-ruble payment mechanisms for oil trades. The same system they'd been exploring for years was suddenly operational. Funny how tariffs can speed things up. In about 6 weeks, Trump's tariffs did more for de-dollarisation than BRICS had accomplished in years of summit declarations. Before the tariffs, 40% of Indian pharma exports went to the United States, accounting for around $6 billion in annual trade. By September, those same companies were redirecting shipments to Brazil, Russia, and Southeast Asia, with payment increasingly handled through new rupee-based mechanisms. Trade wars tend to work best when your target has nowhere else to go, and 20 years ago that might have been true. But at this point, the market infrastructure for circumventing Western markets has been established for some time. It just needed activation. BRICS countries now represent 37% of global GDP when measured by purchasing power parity. The SCO covers 40% of the world's population. These countries are economic giants now. When India needs new markets, China's middle class is right there. When Russia needs customers, Asia's energy demand is insatiable. Now, the West still dominates the financial plumbing with SWIFT, dollar clearing, correspondent banking, and so on. But that monopoly only really works if everyone needs to use it. The moment major powers start launching workarounds, the game is up. China knows this, and that's why their central bank's cross-border interbank payment system recently went live, with real dollarless transactions flowing between Moscow, New Delhi, and Tehran. So, don't be surprised if you hear about more countries using this system every time someone gets tariffed to death by Washington. And it's remarkable how much times have changed. Once upon a time, American economic coercion was strong enough to break the back of an empire. In 1956, Britain teamed up with Israel and France to invade Egypt after President Nasser dared to nationalize Egypt's Suez Canal. US President Dwight Eisenhower was incensed because he feared that this would alienate Western-aligned Middle East countries and push them closer to the Soviet Union. The invasion triggered a massive loss of international confidence in the financial stability of Britain, which was already up to its eyeballs in post-war debt and running current account deficits. Faced with a run on the pound, the Bank of England was tasked with defending the currency on a shoestring budget. And that didn't go so well. What Britain really needed was an emergency loan, the kind of loan that is normally dished out by the IMF. For the US, which wanted Britain out of Egypt, getting its way was like taking candy from a baby. Eisenhower threatened to dump British bonds, a move that would turn a currency crisis into total collapse. And not only that, the US also blocked the UK from receiving emergency loans from the IMF. Checkmate. So, it wasn't long before Britain came scurrying out of Egypt with its tail between its legs, all but confirming the end of British imperial power. And the lesson from this experience stuck for 70 years. If you defy the Yankee Leviathan, you lose access to money. It worked on Britain and God knows how many other countries since. But this time with India, it just flopped. They got the tariff treatment and flew straight to Beijing to break bread with Xi and Putin. In America's heyday, if Washington cut you off from dollars, your goose was cooked. No IMF meant no emergency loans. No World Bank meant no development finance. But in 2025, India's got options. China's new development bank has $50 billion in capital ready to be deployed, loans which come with no American veto and no requirements to privatize your water supply. When Britain needed emergency funds in the 1950s, they had one phone number to call. When India needs them today, they've got a whole contact list. So, we've seen the preview. India ate a 50% tariff and responded by deepening ties with America's rivals. The question now is what happens if the pending 145% tariff on China actually comes into effect. That's an economy 4 times larger than India's, with far more leverage and deeper trade integration globally. So all eyes are now on the 10th of November, when we'll either see Trump kicking the can down the road again, which just about everyone is hoping for, or pressing the red button and finding out what it does. If those 145% tariffs hit, it is a death sentence for China's $500 billion in annual trade with the US. That's electronics, machinery, consumer goods, basically everything on Walmart shelves. Washington seems to think China needs American consumers more than America needs Chinese factories. Maybe that was true in 2010. But China has been building its domestic market for over a decade now. Their middle class is 400 million strong and growing. China's total exports were $3.6 trillion last year, so losing $500 billion of that would not likely be fatal. On the other hand, the economy is wrangling with deflationary pressures, with weak consumption and slowing growth. It's not like the internal market can replace American demand. So, all the better to have a plan B that includes trade deals across Asia, Africa and Latin America then, not to mention the growing BRICS clique. And they just welcomed Indonesia as member number 10. So that's Southeast Asia's biggest economy officially picking a side. Malaysia, Thailand and Nigeria signed on as partners. Heck, even Turkey wanted in, and they're supposed to be a part of NATO. Now, we may see this trade machinery become much more active in the coming years as global alliances reshuffle. However, it'll be much harder for Trump to tariff China up the wazoo than it was for India, because his China tariffs are a gun that can't actually be fired without America blowing its own foot off. And the US oligarchy likely won't allow that to happen, because Tim Cook and Elon Musk have better lobbyists than the State Department has China hawks. Still, watch this space though, because we're not even a quarter of the way through the second Trump administration, and who knows what he might do next that could send US allies Googling how to join BRICS. You know, like invading Venezuela or annexing Greenland or something. And if you'd forgotten all about that, then check out this video to see why on earth he wants to acquire a 51st state in the middle of the Atlantic. But that's all from me for now. If you want to learn more about the BRICS, then check out this video using the link in the top right. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Guy, over and out.